Back in the 1700s, when the shackles of slavery seemed unbreakable, a resilient group of black Indians dared to challenge the status quo, revolting against slavery, providing for runaway slaves, and challenging policies that did not favor the chained man, while the enslavers were ready to make them pay the ultimate price. This is a story of resilience, betrayal, and the dense nature of the tyrant policymakers. So get ready for a thrilling and heartbreaking tale about the tribe they tried writing out of history, the Black Seminoles, birth of the unholy alliance. Formed from the intertribal relationships between Native American and African slaves, the Seminole nation of Florida slowly became the strongest alliance among slaves, and a tribe that the enslavers sought to destroy. Right from the Zanj Rebellion that happened long before Africans were brought to North America, to Nat Turner's bloody uprising in Southampton County, Virginia, the chained and oppressed men have fought several times for their freedom. However, the Seminole Wars were the most significant, as for the first time, the enslavers watched as the eyes of their submissive slaves suddenly became bloody and filled with rage. In an attempt to keep control of Florida, the Spanish decided to bring in local Native American tribes into their mission system. Their sole purpose in wanting them was so that the Native Americans would be utilized as a militia to protect the colony from attacks by the nearby colony of South Carolina. However, the newly introduced European diseases, to which the Native Americans had no immunity, quickly decimated the local population, and the South Carolinian colonists were frequently and violently raided in Florida. Seeing that the Native Americans were almost wiped out, the Spanish authorities resolved to their last resort, convicting runaway African slaves from the southern colonies to move to their territory. Longing for safety and a place to call home, the enslaved Africans did not hesitate to flee to Spanish Florida. But most of them were not willing to join the militia, so in 1693, King Charles II of Spain issued an edict granting these black fugitives liberty in exchange for defending the Spanish settlers in St. Augustine. The Black Seminoles gradually formed what is known as the Gullah culture of the coastal southeast, built their settlements, and were separate from the Indians in their villages. Still, over time, the ethnicities got closer, and intermarried to some extent, and some Black Seminoles adopted Indian customs. They formed alliances with Creek and other Native American tribes seeking refuge in Florida. In this new environment, they developed the Afro-Seminole Creole language, which they used to communicate with the growing Seminole tribe. At this point, the Euro-American settlers were not just eager to take over the fertile land occupied by the Seminoles. They were also worried about the free blacks who were living just across the border from the slave states, armed and ready to defend themselves. So, between 1812 and 1858, the U.S. forces fought many skirmishes and 3 major wars against the Seminoles and the Maroon communities. The First Seminole War. When U.S. Indian removal policies accelerated in the early 19th century, troops drove most of the Seminoles from their land and forced many Black Seminoles into slavery. Yet some Black Seminole communities survived, many ending up in Mexico or Oklahoma, where 2 freedmen bands remain part of the Seminole Nation today. They tried to do everything to ensure they were not enslaved, and this phase led to the famous Seminole Wars. General Andrew $20 Jackson, a ruthless leader with a vendetta against the Black Seminoles, launched a brutal attack on the Negro Fort, a stronghold of resistance. Jackson's objective was clear: crush the Maroon communities and capture the fugitives. The Black Seminoles and their Native American allies fought bravely, but they were vastly outnumbered, and all 270 men were killed. After this attack, the Seminoles transitioned from defending their land to raiding American settlements along the Georgia-Florida border. In November 1817, the long-brewing tension finally exploded as the U.S. soldiers attacked the Seminole village of Foultown, near present-day Bainbridge, Georgia, leading to a battle. In retaliation, a group of Seminoles besieged a boat carrying reinforcements to Fort Scott on the Apalachicola River, killing 43 men, women, and children. A month later, General Andrew Jackson led his troops on a fierce campaign against Seminole villages around Lake Miccosukee and along the Suwannee River, destroying them as he advanced. Jackson also seized the Spanish military post at what is now St. Mark's, and then moved on to capture the Spanish-held town of Pensacola. His tyranny and inhumane military tactics forced Spain to agree to give up its territory in Florida to the United States under the terms of the 1819 Transcontinental Treaty. The war ended, but the peace was short-lived, as Andrew Jackson became the territorial governor of Florida in 1821. He made several raids on the community, and then the major highlight was when he ordered a relentless attack on Angola, a village built by free blacks and Black Seminoles. Over 250 people were captured and sold into slavery, while survivors fled to the interior or escaped to the Bahamas. In the Bahamas, the Black Seminoles found solace in a new village, Red Bays on Andros, where they continued their traditions and way of life. But back in Florida, the construction of the Cape Florida Lighthouse in 1825 marked the beginning of the end for the slave escape route. The once thriving black communities in Florida were all but extinguished, their legacy all but forgotten. Still unsatisfied with how he had depleted the region, in 1830, now President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. This law authorized the relocation of all Native American peoples to lands west of the Mississippi River. Gadsden then negotiated the Treaty of Payne's Landing with various backstabbing Seminole leaders. The treaty stated that the Seminoles would move within 3 years to the land assigned to the Creek Indians west of the Mississippi if their leaders found the land suitable. It also required that the African Americans living on the Seminole reservation be left behind to be claimed as enslaved people. A group of unloyal Seminoles traveled to the Creek lands, found them acceptable, and then signed the Treaty of Fort Gibson, confirming the earlier treaty's terms. However, the Seminoles later denied that they had agreed to be removed from their land. The Second Seminole War. This war, fought for a long and bloody 7 years between 1835 and 1842, marked the pinnacle of tension between the U.S. and the Seminoles, with the African Seminole alliance at its strongest. General Wiley Thompson was assigned to oversee the removal of the Seminoles, just as agreed in the treaty. On getting to the region, he discovered that the chief they had discussed with did not have enough influence, as the U.S. government had thought he and the people did not plan to leave. So he threatened them, saying that President Jackson had authorized him to use force if necessary. However, for the Black Seminoles, the fear of being slaves again was greater than that of dying, so the whole tribe threw their support behind the militant Seminole leader Osceola. On December 28, 1835, as Major Francis Dade led more than 100 soldiers from Fort Brooke to Fort King, about 180 Seminoles and their allies ambushed the troops, killing all but 3. This brutal attack, known as the Dade Massacre, marked the start of the Second Seminole War. That same day, Osceola also killed General Thompson. A year into the war, and it was very bloody for the U.S. troops as the Seminoles fiercely attacked and successfully thwarted several U.S. efforts to subdue them. Black leaders like John Caesar, Abraham, and John Horse played crucial roles in the war, recruiting plantation slave people to join the rebellion, while also destroying 21 large sugar plantations from December 1835 to the summer of 1836. The U.S. forces were on their last straws when General Thomas Jessup took command and changed strategies. Instead of marching out as an army, the general sent small groups of men to pursue Seminole bands, which began to turn the tide. In October 1837, General Jessup successfully set up a deceitful truce and captured Osceola and dozens of his followers. 2 months later, Colonel Zachary Taylor led around 1,000 men to capture the Seminole stronghold camp at Lake Okeechobee, and he was victorious. The final major battle of the war was the Battle of the Loxahatchee River, which took place in January 1838. A group of sailors and soldiers, led by Lieutenant Levin Powell, reported seeing a large group of Seminoles. General Jessup sent about 1,500 men to engage them a few days later. The militant tribe fought valiantly, but ultimately, they were defeated. Knowing that the war would be over if the Black and Native American communities were separated, the general promised that there would be no repercussions for the Black men who surrendered and migrated. Seeing this as the best option, John Horse and his loyals surrendered, but as usual, General Jessup had tricks under his sleeves. The army failed to honor its promises, and those who surrendered fully were captured into slavery again. So over 500 Black Seminoles were forced to journey through the famous Trail of Tears with the other Seminoles into Indian Territory. The Second Seminole War was finally declared over on August 14, 1842, surviving in a foreign land. Even in the Creeks, the Black Seminoles were still not at peace because there were also slaveholders under the Creek Nation administration. In fact, there were attempts to re-enslave some black slaves, and this led John Horse and others to establish towns near Seminole settlements, continuing their pattern from Florida. The Black Seminoles now faced threats from slave raiders, including pro-slavery Creek tribe members and some Seminoles who had abandoned their allegiance to the blacks after the U.S. defeat in the war. In 1948, the U.S. Attorney General succumbed to pro-slavery pressure and then ordered the Army to disarm the black community. This left hundreds of Black Seminoles vulnerable, unable to leave the settlement or defend themselves against slavers, rendering them helpless against the persistent threat of capture and enslavement. In 1849, John Horse, a prominent Black Seminole leader, orchestrated a daring escape with approximately 180 Black Seminoles to northern Mexico, where slavery had been abolished 2 decades prior. They joined forces with traditionalist Seminoles led by Chief Cocoche and successfully crossed into Mexico in July 1850, securing their freedom. The Mexican government welcomed them as allies and border guards, and they settled in El Nacimiento, Coahuila. For the next 20 years, the Black Seminoles, now known as Muskogos, served as militiamen and Native American fighters in Mexico, defending their community against Texas slave raiders with the support of the Mexican army. By the 1940s, their thriving agricultural community in El Nacimiento de los Negros, Coahuila, had grown to 500 descendants living alongside the Kickapoo tribe. Most of their descendants relocated to Texas by the 1990s, carrying on their legacy as a testament to their resilience and determination. After the Civil War, several hundred Black Seminoles remained in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. The U.S. required the Seminole and other 5 civilized tribes to emancipate their slaves and grant them full citizenship rights in the tribes. The Seminole freedmen thrived in towns near the Seminole communities on the reservation, with many living in Wewoka, Oklahoma, founded by John Horse in 1849. By 1900, there were 1,000 freedmen listed in the Seminole Nation's population, or about 1/3 of the total. However, after allotment, many freedmen lost their land to white settlers, and some moved to urban areas or left the state due to racial segregation. Since 1954, the freedmen have been included in the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma's Constitution, with 2 bands representing multiple towns and electing representatives to the General Council. Today, the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma recognizes and honors the history and contributions of its freedmen citizens. In 1870, the U.S. Army invited Black Seminoles to return from Mexico to serve as scouts, forming the Black Seminole Scouts Unit. Despite its name, the unit was initially composed of African Americans. The Scouts played a crucial role in the Texas Indian Wars of the 1870s, based at Fort Clark, Texas, alongside the Buffalo Soldiers. They gained fame for their exceptional tracking skills and endurance. 4 Scouts received the Medal of Honor, 3 for their bravery against the Comanche in 1875. After the wars, the unit remained at Fort Clark until its disbandment in 1914. The veterans and their families settled in Brackettville, Texas, which became the spiritual center of the Texas-based Black Seminoles. Freedom came at last, but the tribe was written out of America's history. Thanks for watching to the end. Remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates. And while you're still here, click the video on your screen for more mind-blowing videos.